Why did the room fall quiet the moment she stepped inside? It wasn't announced. No one called her name. No one told her where to sit. The silence just happened. Conversations thinned. Chairs stopped scraping. A projector hummed on without anyone touching it. And there she was, standing at the edge of the briefing room, half lit by the morning sun leaking through reinforced glass, wearing a jacket that looked like it belonged to another century. It was too big for her shoulders, too worn for protocol. The fabric had softened into something almost cloth-like, the way things do when they've been carried through heat, sweat, rain, and time. One sleeve cuff was frayed. The zipper refused to rise past her ribs, and just beneath the fold, barely visible unless you knew where to look, sat a faded triangular patch. Its edges were almost gone, its meaning even more so. Someone near the front leaned toward a friend and whispered, not quietly enough, "Is she lost?" Another voice, sharper, "That jacket's not regulation." She heard both. She heard everything. Captain Lena Ward didn't move. She didn't explain. She didn't correct them. She just stood there, hands loose at her sides, fingers twitching once before stilling. Her pulse thudded behind her ears, steady but heavy, like a drum heard through walls. She hadn't planned on coming inside. She told herself she would stand in the back, blend into the shadows, pay her respects and leave before the speeches started. That was safer. That was easier. But something about the smell of burned coffee and recycled air had pulled her forward, back into a room she hadn't entered in nearly 9 years. The last time she'd been here, she'd been 26, fresh scars, fresh confidence, a voice that still believed orders would always come in time. She swallowed. At the front of the room, a major cleared his throat. "Briefing will begin in 2 minutes," he said, eyes flicking to her jacket, then away. He didn't ask her to sit. He didn't ask her to leave. Ignored was easier than confrontation. Lena finally moved, choosing a seat along the wall. She lowered herself slowly, like gravity had doubled. The chair creaked under her weight, or maybe it was just loud in her head. She rested her elbows on her knees, clasped her hands together, and stared at the scuffed floor tiles. Her reflection stared back faintly, older, harder, eyes that had learned how not to show everything. Her inner conflict pressed in quietly. This was a mistake. She knew it the moment she sat down. Coming back always was. But anniversaries had a way of reopening doors you'd welded shut. And today marked 10 years since the Ridge. 10 years since silence swallowed the radio. 10 years since she became the last voice anyone heard. The projector flickered to life. A satellite image filled the screen. Mountains, sharp lines, no names. Someone began talking about logistics, about airspace and weather patterns. The words washed over her without sticking. She wasn't here for this. She was here because the jacket hadn't let her sleep. It had been folded in the back of her closet, tucked inside a garment bag she never opened. She tried to forget it, tried to believe she didn't need reminders. But last night at exactly 02:17 she'd woken up with her heart racing, fingers curled like they were gripping something invisible. In the dark she'd sat up, walked to the closet and unzipped the bag. The smell had hit her first, dust, oil, something metallic and old. Her hand had found the patch without looking. And she'd known she was coming. A low chuckle pulled her back to the room. 2 lieutenants a few seats away were murmuring to each other. One nodded toward her jacket. "Vintage, huh?" he said. "Must be sentimental." Sentimental. She almost laughed. Instead, she focused on breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth, slow, controlled, the way they taught her after the nightmare started, after she'd learned that silence could be louder than gunfire. Her mind drifted despite her efforts. The ridge came back in pieces, never whole. A flash of moonlight on rock, the weight of the rifle digging into her shoulder, the smell of dust and blood mixing until she couldn't tell which was which. And the radio, always the radio, hissing, popping, then going dead. "Send backup," the voice had said. "Calm, too calm, we're pinned." She answered immediately, clear, steady. "Copy, hold position." They'd never responded again. A chair scraped nearby. Someone stood to leave, glancing at her as they passed. Their eyes lingered on the patch. Confusion flickered, then dismissal. It was just an old jacket. Lena felt something tighten in her chest, not anger, not pride, something closer to grief. Because once that patch had meant everything. Once it had marked a line you crossed knowing you wouldn't come back the same. Now it was just a ghost stitched into cloth. At the front, the major introduced the guest speaker. "We're honored today," he said, "to welcome General Ruth Connors." A ripple of attention moved through the room. Phones were tucked away, backs straightened. Connors was a name people recognized, decorated, respected, the kind of leader whose presence filled space without demanding it. Lena didn't look up. She knew Connors, not personally, not really, but she'd known her voice once, crackling through static at 3 in the morning, calm and unyielding, asking questions no one else thought to ask. The general entered from the side door, boots quiet, movements precise. She paused just inside the room, scanning faces. When her eyes reached Lena, they stopped. Just for a fraction of a second. Enough. Lena felt it like a shift in pressure, like the air had changed density. She kept her gaze down, heart suddenly hammering. This was not why she'd come. She hadn't come to be seen. She'd come to remember, to stand quietly at the back of something and leave. The general's eyes moved on. The room exhaled without realizing it had been holding breath. The briefing continued. Slides changed. Time passed strangely, both fast and slow. Lena stayed still, her body heavy with memories she didn't let reach her face. She thought of the woman she'd been before the ridge, the confidence, the certainty, the belief that doing everything right guaranteed the right outcome. She thought of who she'd become afterward, quieter, sharper, a woman who listened more than she spoke, who cleaned headstones on days no one watched, who carried names in her pocket like talismans. She thought of the patch, issued to a handful, retired without ceremony, forgotten by most but not by her. As the briefing wrapped up, chairs scraped again. Voices rose, people stood and filed out. No one spoke to her. No one asked who she was or why she'd come, and that was fine. She waited until the room thinned. Then she stood. The jacket shifted on her shoulders, heavy, familiar, honest. As she turned toward the exit, she felt it again, that sense that something unfinished was unfolding, that this wasn't just about memory. That silence, once broken, doesn't always stay that way. Behind her, someone whispered, almost to themselves, "Who was that?" Lena didn't answer. She stepped into the hallway, the door closing softly behind her, unaware that before the day was over, that old jacket would speak louder than any speech. And when it did, the truth it carried would finally be seen. Why did the memory always return when she thought she was finally past it? Lena stood outside the building, the heavy door settling shut behind her with a dull, final sound. The air hit her face, cold, clean, sharp enough to sting. She welcomed it. It reminded her she was here, present, not crouched behind stone on a nameless ridge half a world away. For a moment she didn't move. People streamed past her in clusters, laughter breaking out in places that felt inappropriate to her ears. A pair of cadets jogged by, boots striking concrete in perfect rhythm. Someone argued quietly into a phone. Life went on, unbothered by the weight pressing against her ribs. She pulled the jacket tighter, though it didn't really help. It never did. Her car was parked at the far edge of the lot. She started toward it, steps measured, deliberate. Each footfall felt louder than it should have, as if the ground itself was paying attention. Halfway there, she stopped. She hadn't planned on going to the memorial. But plans had a way of bending when ghosts were involved. The base memorial sat on a rise beyond the hangars, a simple circle of stone and metal that caught the wind just right. Names were etched into dark panels, clean lines carved deep enough to last longer than memory. She avoided this place for years, told herself she didn't need it, that she carried enough already. Still, her feet turned without asking permission. The path curved gently uphill. With every step her chest tightened. Not panic, something slower, sadder, the kind of ache that had learned patience. She reached the circle and stopped just inside its edge. The names were arranged by mission, by year. She knew exactly where to look. Her eyes found the spot immediately, like they'd been waiting for the chance. CLLHN Thomas J. KIA. Below it 4 more names. Her throat closed. She stood there longer than she meant to. Long enough for the wind to tug at her hair. Long enough for a memory to push its way to the surface, uninvited and vivid. Night-thin moon, the ridge sloping away into nothing. She'd been prone, rifle braced, scope pressed to her eye. Her job was overwatch. Her job was patience. She'd been good at both. Too good, maybe. The call had come through distorted. Contact, movement, then panic barely contained. She'd adjusted her position, tracked heat signatures through the scope, relayed what she saw. She'd done everything right. Except one thing. She trusted the radio. Static had swallowed the channel whole. She'd called again and again. No answer, no backup, no command, just silence stretching longer than it ever should have. She could have broken protocol, could have moved, could have gone down the ridge herself, but orders were orders even when they didn't come, especially when they didn't come. By the time she realized no one was coming, it was already too late. A voice drifted into her thoughts, pulling her back to the present. "You okay, ma'am?" She turned. A young airman stood a few paces away, uncertainty written across his face. He looked barely old enough to shave. His eyes flicked to her jacket, then back to her face. "I'm fine," she said. Her voice sounded steady. It surprised her every time. He hesitated. "Ceremony, not until this afternoon." "I know." Another pause. He nodded, satisfied enough, and moved on. Lena let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. It was worn thin, creased and recreased so many times it barely held its shape. Names were written on it. 5 of them. She traced one with her thumb. Callahan. She had come back for him, for all of them, but mostly for the one who had trusted her voice through the dark. Her stomach twisted with a familiar inner conflict. Guilt fought with logic. Responsibility wrestled with reason. She knew, intellectually, that she hadn't caused the silence. She knew failures rarely belonged to one person, but knowing didn't stop the quiet question that followed her everywhere. What if I had moved anyway? She folded the paper and tucked it back into her pocket. Footsteps approached again, slower this time, heavier. "Captain Ward." The voice was calm, female, command-level calm. Lena turned. General Connors stood a few feet away, hands clasped behind her back. Up close, the woman looked older than Lena remembered from photos. Lines carved deep by years of command and consequence, but her eyes were sharp, focused, the kind of eyes that missed nothing. "Yes, ma'am," Lena said automatically, spine straightening before she could stop herself. "At ease," Connors said softly. Lena relaxed a fraction. The general's gaze dropped just briefly to the jacket, to the patch. Something passed over her face, recognition perhaps, or memory. "I didn't expect to see you here," Connors said. "I didn't expect to be here," Lena replied, honest, bare. Connors nodded. "You never do until you are." They stood in silence for a moment, the memorial between them. Wind whispered through the open space. Somewhere in the distance, an aircraft roared to life. "You kept the jacket," Connors said finally. Lena swallowed, couldn't throw it away. "No," Connors agreed. "Some things don't let you." Another pause, longer this time. You know, Connors said, people remember that mission differently. Lena felt her chest tighten. I'm sure they do. They remember the outcome, the loss, the report. Connors's voice was even, careful. They don't remember the decisions that were made in the dark. Lena looked at her hands. I do. I know. Connors studied her for a long moment. That's why I wanted to speak with you. Lena met her gaze. Anxiety flared, sharp and sudden. About what? About telling the story correctly, Connors said, and about giving credit where it was never given. Lena shook her head slowly. I didn't do anything special. Connors's mouth curved just slightly. That's usually how it sounds, isn't it? Before Lena could respond, a voice called from down the path. General, they're ready for you. Connors turned, then looked back at Lena. Stay, she said, not an order, an invitation. Lena hesitated. Every instinct told her to leave, to retreat before attention found her, but something in Connors's eyes held her in place. I'll think about it, Lena said. Connors nodded once and walked away. Lena exhaled slowly. Her heart was racing now, a different rhythm than before. This felt dangerous in a way combat never had. Being seen always did. She glanced back at the names on the wall. I stayed, she whispered, though she didn't know who she was saying it to. The afternoon stretched ahead of her, heavy with expectation. She didn't know what the general intended. She didn't know if she was ready to stand in the open. But she knew one thing. The silence she'd carried for 10 years was starting to crack. And once it broke, there would be no putting it back together. Why did her hands start shaking only after the crowd began to gather? Lena noticed it when she tried to button the jacket higher and her fingers refused to cooperate. They weren't trembling from cold. She'd flown through worse weather with steadier hands. This was something else. This was the weight of eyes she could already feel, even before anyone truly noticed her. The memorial grounds filled slowly, like a held breath finally released. Folding chairs scraped against stone. Families clustered together, coats pulled tight. Veterans arrived in quiet pairs, some leaning on canes, others standing straighter than age suggested. Medals caught the light in brief flashes before disappearing beneath scarves and lapels. Lena stayed at the edge. She always stayed at the edge. From here she could leave if she needed to. No explanation required. No questions asked. She kept her shoulders slightly turned, body angled toward the exit path. An old habit. Never trap yourself if you don't have to. The jacket weighed heavier now. Not physically. Symbolically. It felt like it was pulling memories to the surface just by existing in daylight. She wondered how many people saw it as just fabric, how many dismissed it the way they dismissed her presence earlier. She told herself it didn't matter. It still did. A young girl passed by holding her father's hand, eyes wide as she stared at the uniforms. Daddy, she whispered, were you a hero? The man smiled gently. I just did my job. Lena flinched before she could stop herself. Just did my job. She said those words once, repeated them until they sounded true, but jobs ended, consequences didn't. The band assembled near the podium, brass catching the pale sun. The murmur of conversation softened, then faded. A familiar tension settled over the space, the kind that came before something formal, something irreversible. Lena's chest tightened again. She considered leaving. Then she heard the name. Operation Redline Ridge. It was spoken into the microphone, clipped and careful. The master of ceremonies continued, voice steady, recounting facts. Terrain, timeline, losses. The words were clean, sanitized. They floated above the crowd without cutting too deep. Lena felt each one like a blade anyway. Her mind filled the gaps effortlessly. She saw the ridge again, sharp against the night sky. Heard the uneven breathing in her headset. Felt the slow burn in her shoulder from holding position too long. She remembered the moment she realized something was wrong, not all at once, but creeping in like cold through boots. The radio had gone quiet in a way that felt wrong. Silence could mean many things. In her line of work, it often meant survival, stealth, discipline. But this silence had been empty. She remembered pressing the transmit button harder, as if force might carry her voice farther. She remembered saying their call signs over and over, refusing to believe no one was answering, refusing to accept what that meant. The crowd shifted, someone coughed, a baby fussed, then quieted. Lena realized her jaw hurt from clenching. She forced herself to breathe. At the podium, the speaker concluded and stepped aside. "It is now my honor," he said, "to welcome retired General Ruth Connors." Applause rose, respectful and contained. Connors approached the microphone, posture relaxed, presence undeniable. She waited until the applause faded completely before speaking. When she did, her voice carried easily, no strain, no theatrics. "We gather today," Connors began, "to remember names. Not numbers, not reports, names." Lena felt something shift in her chest. Connors spoke of service without romance, of duty without spectacle, of choices made with incomplete information and full consequence. Her words didn't try to soothe. They acknowledged weight instead. Then Connors paused. She looked out over the crowd slowly, deliberately. Her eyes found Lena. The pause stretched. People followed her gaze. Heads turned. Whispers sparked like static. Lena felt the sudden heat of attention wash over her, sharp and disorienting. Every instinct screamed to move, to shrink, to disappear. Connors stepped away from the podium. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Lena's pulse thundered. She couldn't look away. Connors crossed the grass with measured steps, boots silent against stone. Each step closed the distance Lena had carefully maintained. This was happening. Connors stopped in front of her. Up close, the general's eyes were softer than Lena expected, still sharp, still commanding, but softened by something like understanding. Connors glanced down just slightly at the jacket, at the faded triangular patch. Then she straightened and raised her hand. The salute was crisp, exact, held longer than ceremony required. The world seemed to stop. Gasps moved through the crowd. Someone dropped a program. A veteran too rose back instinctively, rose to his feet, hands snapping up in response. Others followed without knowing why, bodies reacting before minds caught up. Lena stood frozen. For a split second, she was 19 again, standing on a tarmac under a different sky, being told what that patch meant, being told where it would take her, being warned what it would cost. Her throat closed. Slowly, deliberately, she returned the salute. Her hand was steady now. Connors lowered her arm. "That patch," she said, voice low but carrying, "was issued to a small unit tasked with missions no one would claim and outcomes no one would celebrate." She let the words settle. "Captain Lena Ward was Overwatch on Red Line Ridge," Connors continued. "She held position when communications failed. She maintained cover until extraction windows closed. She did not abandon her post." Lena felt heat rise behind her eyes. She didn't blink. "She was ordered to wait," Connors said, "and she did." Silence pressed in, heavy and absolute. She has lived with that silence ever since. Connors stepped back, turning to the crowd. "We speak often of bravery as action. Sometimes bravery is restraint. Sometimes it is bearing the weight of outcomes you did not choose." Connors looked back at Lena one last time. "Captain," she said softly. Lena nodded once. The band began to play, a single trumpet at first, mournful, clean, notes drifting upward and dissolving into the open sky. Lena stood there, jacket hanging heavy on her shoulders, heart cracked wide open. For the first time in 10 years, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like recognition. And as the final note faded, Lena realized something quietly profound. She had never truly been alone on that ridge. She'd just been the last one listening. What did it mean when the applause never came? Lena stood where she was long after the trumpet's final note dissolved into the air. No clapping followed, no murmured approval, just a deep, collective stillness, as if the crowd understood, instinctively, that noise would cheapen what had just happened. Her arm lowered slowly from the salute. Only then did she realize her shoulders ached, tight from holding herself together. The jacket felt heavier than ever now, like it had absorbed the weight of every eye, every unspoken thought. She exhaled. People were looking at her differently, not with curiosity now, not with dismissal, with something closer to reverence, though that made her uncomfortable. Reverence created distance. She didn't want distance. She wanted truth. She wanted to leave. General Connors returned to the podium without ceremony and finished the program with a few measured words. Names were read, wreaths laid. The crowd followed along quietly, but Lena barely heard it. Her thoughts were loud now, echoing off memories she'd kept sealed. When it was over, people began to move again, slowly, like they were relearning how. Small clusters formed, low voices, a few discreet glances her way. No one approached her at first, and she was grateful for that. She turned toward the exit path. That was when a voice stopped her. "Captain Ward." She paused, eyes closing for a heartbeat before turning. A man stood a few steps away, older than her, posture slightly bent but eyes clear. He wore a service jacket adorned with faded pins. His hand trembled faintly as he raised it, not in salute, just acknowledgement. "I was with 2nd Platoon," he said. "Different sector, same night." Lena nodded. "I remember." His breath caught. You stayed up there the whole time." "Yes." "We kept wondering," he said, swallowing. "If anyone had eyes on us, if anyone knew." "I knew," Lena said quietly. The man's face crumpled, relief and grief colliding. He nodded once hard, then stepped back without another word. That was all he needed. That was all either of them could carry. Lena continued walking. Each step away from the memorial felt heavier than the last. She had expected something, closure maybe, or release. Instead, she felt exposed, like a wound uncovered after years under bandage. Healing, she knew, was rarely clean. She reached the edge of the grounds and stopped near a bench, lowering herself onto it with a careful slowness. Her hands rested on her knees. They were shaking again. Ignored, anxious, proud, broken. All at once, she leaned forward, elbows on thighs, staring at the gravel. The world around her blurred slightly. She focused on breathing again, grounding herself the way therapists had taught her. Name 5 things you can see, 4 you can hear, 3 you can feel. Gravel, trees, flagpole, shoes. Wind, distant voices, leaves. The bench beneath her, the jacket on her shoulders, the ache in her chest. A shadow crossed the ground in front of her. "May I?" She looked up. A woman stood there, mid-40s, civilian clothes, eyes red but steady. She gestured to the bench. "Of course," Lena said. They sat in silence for a moment. Then the woman spoke. "My brother was on that mission," she said. "Callahan." Lena's breath hitched despite herself. "I'm Sarah," the woman continued. "I've read the reports, all of them, but today was the first time I felt like someone actually saw him." Lena's voice came out rough. He was steady. Even when things went bad, he kept his people focused. Sarah smiled faintly. "That sounds like him." Another pause. "Thank you," Sarah said simply. Lena nodded, unable to trust herself with words. Sarah stood and squeezed Lena's shoulder, once before walking away. The contact lingered long after she was gone. Later, Lena found herself back at the edge of the base, near a small diner just off the access road. She hadn't planned on stopping, but hunger crept in quietly, like exhaustion. the kind that waited until it was safe to surface. Inside, the diner smelled of coffee and grease and something sweet baking in the back. A bell chimed softly as she entered. A few heads turned. One man nudged another. Someone whispered her name. She chose a booth by the window. The waitress approached, notepad ready, then hesitated when she noticed the jacket. Her eyes softened. "Coffee?" she asked. "Yes, please." As Lena waited, she stared out the window, watching traffic pass. Normal life. People heading home. Kids arguing in back seats. Radios playing songs that had nothing to do with sacrifice. Her inner conflict returned, quieter now but persistent. Had today helped? Or had it reopened something she'd worked so hard to manage? Recognition was strange that way. It didn't erase the past. It reframed it. The waitress returned with coffee and set it down gently. "On the house," she said. "My dad served." "Thank you," Lena replied. She wrapped her hands around the mug, warmth seeping into her palms. For the first time in a long while, she didn't pull away from it. Across the room, a boy, maybe 10, stared at her openly. When their eyes met, he didn't look away. Instead, he raised his hand in a clumsy salute. Lena blinked, then returned it, small and understated. The boy grinned. Something in her chest loosened. She finished her coffee slowly, savoring the ordinary quiet. When she stood to leave, she hesitated, then slipped the jacket off her shoulders and folded it carefully. She placed it beside her on the seat, looking at it as if seeing it clearly for the first time. It wasn't just a reminder of loss. It was proof of presence. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the pavement. Lena stepped into the evening, jacket folded under her arm, unsure of what came next, but for once, not afraid of the uncertainty. She walked toward her car, feeling lighter without understanding why. Maybe redemption didn't arrive with fanfare. Maybe it came in small moments, shared silence, honest acknowledgement, the courage to be seen. And maybe dignity didn't need to explain itself. It simply acted. Why did the night feel heavier than the day, even after everything had been said? Lena drove without turning on the radio. The road unwound ahead of her in long, quiet stretches, headlights cutting through the dusk. Trees blurred past like dark witnesses. She kept both hands on the wheel, knuckles relaxed but firm, the way she'd learned to drive convoy routes where distraction could cost lives. The jacket lay, folded on the passenger seat. She glanced at it once, then again. All day it had been on her shoulders, absorbing eyes, history, recognition. Now sitting there in silence, it looked smaller somehow, just cloth, just thread. But she knew better, she always had. The town outside the base came into view slowly, low buildings, muted lights, a place that lived in the shadow of departures and returns. She hadn't been here in years, not since the debriefs ended and the questions stopped coming. Back then, she'd left as soon as she was cleared to go. No goodbyes, no backward glances. Tonight, her turn signal clicked on almost by itself. She pulled into the motel parking lot, the same one she'd stayed in a decade ago. It hadn't changed. Same flickering sign, same soda machine humming like it was tired of trying. The familiarity unsettled her more than if it had been completely different. Inside, the clerk looked up from a crossword. "Evening." "Evening," Lena replied. One night, that's all she told herself, just one night. The room smelled faintly of detergent and old carpet. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it for a moment, eyes shut, forehead resting against the cool surface. The quiet pressed in. No schedules, no expectations, no crowd. This was the dangerous part. She set the jacket on the small table near the window, carefully, almost reverently. Then she sat on the edge of the bed and stared at it. Ignored, anxious, determined, proud, broken, hopeful. All the emotions tangled together now, impossible to separate. She reached for the jacket before she could talk herself out of it and slid her hand into the inner pocket. Her fingers brushed paper. She pulled it free. A folded photograph. She hadn't looked at it in years. The photo was grainy, corners curled. 5 figures crouched together, helmets on, faces smudged with dirt and fatigue. Someone had insisted on the picture before deployment, laughing about how bad they all looked. Lena remembered rolling her eyes, checking her watch, eager to get moving. They looked impossibly young now. She traced each face with her thumb. Callahan, Reyes, Mitchell, HSU, and herself barely recognizable, eyes sharp with belief. Her throat tightened. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. She didn't know who she was apologizing to anymore. The dead, the living, the woman she'd been. Sleep came in fragments that night, short, jagged pieces. She dreamed of radio static again, of voices just out of reach, but something was different. This time the silence didn't feel accusing. It felt tired, like it had finally been heard. She woke before dawn. The sky outside was still dark, just beginning to soften at the edges. She sat up slowly, heart steady, breath calm. No panic, no jolt of fear. That alone felt like progress. She dressed quietly and picked up the jacket. There was one more place she needed to go. The cemetery sat on a hill overlooking the town, modest and orderly. She parked near the entrance and walked the rest of the way, gravel crunching softly beneath her boots. Morning mist curled low over the ground, blurring the headstones until they looked like shadows rather than markers. She found the grave easily. CLLHN Thomas J. She stopped a few feet away, suddenly unsure. This felt more intimate than the ceremony. No crowd, no general, no words prepared in advance. Just her. She set the jacket down gently on the grass beside the headstone. The patch faced outward. "I used to think staying was the only thing I had left," she said softly. "Like if I kept watch long enough, it would make things right." The wind stirred, rustling leaves. "I didn't know how to leave," she admitted. "Didn't know how to live without listening for you." She swallowed hard. "They saw it yesterday," she continued. "Not all of it, but enough." Her voice wavered, then steadied. I think it's time I stopped carrying this alone." She stood there for a long time after that, saying nothing, letting the silence exist without fighting it. When she finally picked the jacket up again, it felt different, still heavy, still meaningful, but no longer fused to her skin. On her way back to the car, she noticed a small group approaching. 3 teenagers, maybe part of a school program, led by an older man with a veteran's cap. They slowed when they saw her. One of the boys pointed at the jacket. "Is that real?" he asked, not disrespectful, just curious. Lena considered brushing him off. It would have been easier, but something in her shifted. "Yes," she said, "it is." "What does the patch mean?" another asked. She looked at it for a moment, then back at them. "It means someone stood watch," she said, "even when it was hard, even when no one noticed." The boys nodded, absorbing that quietly. "That's it?" the first one asked. "That's enough," Lena replied. She left them there, climbing into her car as the sun finally crested the horizon. The drive away felt different from the drive in. Lighter, not because the past was gone, but because it had finally been placed where it belonged. As the town faded in her rearview mirror, Lena made a decision she'd been avoiding for years. She wouldn't put the jacket back in the closet. She wouldn't hide it away like a wound. She would pass it on someday, not as a trophy, as a story. Because silence had shaped her, but it no longer owned her. And for the first time since the ridge, Lena Ward drove forward without listening for a radio that would never answer, carrying memory, yes, but also something fragile and new. The permission to keep living. Why did letting go feel less like loss, and more like breathing for the first time? Lena didn't realize she was smiling until her jaw started to ache. The road stretched ahead of her, washed in early light, the kind that didn't promise anything dramatic, just honest clarity. Fields rolled past. Gas stations opened their doors. A town woke up without knowing she was leaving it behind for the last time. The jacket was still on the passenger seat, but it no longer felt like an anchor. She drove for hours, not in a hurry, not delaying either. Somewhere between mile markers and half-forgotten exits, something inside her settled. Not healed, not erased, just aligned, like a bone finally set after years of healing crooked. Her phone buzzed once. She ignored it, then again. At a rest stop, she pulled over and checked it. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Captain Ward, a familiar voice said. General Connors. Yes, ma'am. You left early, Connors said, not accusatory, observant. I needed to, Lena replied. I thought you might. A pause. I wanted you to know I submitted the addendum last night. Full context, full responsibility chain. Your name is where it should have been from the beginning. Lena closed her eyes. Thank you, she said quietly. There's more, Connors added. I'm forming a small advisory unit. Training, ethics, decision-making under silence. I'd like you to consider it. Lena exhaled slowly. A familiar instinct rose, to deflect, to decline, to disappear back into quiet usefulness. She almost followed it. Almost. Let me think about it, she said. Connors smiled through the phone. Lena could hear it. That's all I ask. The call ended. Lena sat there for a long moment, engine idling, watching a family unload snacks from their car. A father lifted a toddler onto his shoulders. The child laughed, careless and loud. Life, in its ordinary defiance, continued. She thought about the ridge again, but this time the memory didn't pull her under. She remembered small things now. Callahan's laugh, Ray's humming off-key, Mitchell's terrible coffee, H. Sue's quiet jokes, not just the end, the living parts. That felt like progress. She reached over and picked up the jacket, turned it over in her hands. The patch caught the light briefly, threads dull but proud. She ran her thumb along its edge, then folded the jacket carefully and placed it in the back seat. Not hidden. Just resting. Weeks passed. Lena didn't vanish like she usually did. She stayed. She accepted Connors's offer. She sat in rooms with younger operators and pilots and analysts, telling stories that didn't end cleanly. Stories where the right choice wasn't obvious until long after the fact. Stories where silence mattered. She never dramatized it. She never raised her voice. And when someone asked her what heroism looked like, she never talked about the ridge first. She talked about staying present when walking away would be easier. She talked about accountability without spectacle. She talked about living with the consequences of restraint. Some listened politely. Some leaned forward, hungry for something real. That was enough. One afternoon, months later, Lena found herself back at the diner near the base. Not out of necessity, out of choice. The bell chimed as she entered. The same smell, coffee and grease and something warm baking. She chose the booth by the window again. The waitress recognized her. Usual. Yes, Lena said, smiling. Thank you. As she waited, she noticed a young woman a few tables over. Early 20s. Flight jacket, nervous energy. The woman kept glancing at Lena, then away. Finally, she stood and approached. Ma'am, she said, I just wanted to say your talk last week about silence. Lena nodded. What about it? It helped, the woman said, voice tight. I thought something was wrong with me, that I was loud enough. Lena's expression softened. There's nothing wrong with quiet, she said. It just speaks differently. The woman swallowed, nodded, and returned to her table. Lena sat back, letting the moment pass through her without trying to hold on to it. Outside, the day moved on. That evening at home, Lena opened the closet and took out the garment bag. She didn't put the jacket back inside. Instead, she hung it on a hook by the door. Not displayed, not hidden, exactly where it belonged. A reminder, not of what she lost, but of what she carried through. Later, as dusk settled, she stepped onto her porch and watched the sky darken. Somewhere, a radio played faintly. Somewhere, someone was standing watch. Somewhere, silence was being mistaken for absence. She knew better now. Silence wasn't empty. It was full of choices. She thought of the ridge one last time, not with guilt, not with anger, but with respect, for the people who hadn't come back, and for the woman who had. Lena Ward stood there, hands in her pockets, breathing evenly, grounded in a life that finally felt whole enough to keep building. She didn't need applause. She didn't need permission. She had learned what the jacket had been trying to teach her all along. Sometimes strength doesn't shout. Sometimes honor doesn't explain itself. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.